Metric Motorcycle Madness presents Fork Seal and Oil Replacement without a fork seal driver. Now this process is going to be similar across many motorcycles, including Harleys and metric bikes, regardless of design of the motorcycle. However, the forks that we're going to be looking at today are going to be standard forks and not upside down forks or USD forks. And that's the way this design is going to be. I apologize for the length of this video being what it is, but I didn't want to split this up into two parts because then it's going to be harder to look for the separate parts and then go in between where you need to find certain bits of information. You're going to want to skip ahead in certain parts most likely. The forks designs themselves are going to be pretty similar for the most part as to how the damper cartridges are put together. However, taking the forks out of the bike is going to be mostly what's different if you have a different motorcycle. This, of course, is what we're doing here today, is going to be done on a Suzuki Savage. Hey guys, so we're going to be showing you how to do replacement of fork seals today. This is going to be on a 2000 Suzuki Savage. However, this is pretty much the same across all metric bikes, your Hondas, Suzukis, Yamahas, Kawasaki. A little bit different of a process if you have upside down forks, and by that I mean your basically look like this being on the top and this being on the bottom. Pretty much the same process, just kind of upside down a little bit in reverse. But this is a standard type of fork for metric bikes. So we'll show you how. I'm not going to give you torque specifications or anything like that because it's different for every bike. I'm not going to give you size of the fork and size of the fork seals and dust wipers. I will go into a little bit into depth about weight of fork oil. Actually, I'll just get that out of the way first. You get a couple different types of fork oil. It goes all the way from 5 weight to 10 to 15 to even 20. 20s for like larger touring bikes. 5 weight honestly is more for like dirt bikes and stuff. You really shouldn't be running 5 weight in a bike even like this. For a bike like this, I'm probably going to use 10 weight because it's a lightweight bike, small forks. It's also based on if you're going to ride a passenger, and also based on the weight of the rider. So if you were a heavier set person, maybe a 15 weight might be better for your bike, especially if you have a larger one like this VT 1100. A smaller one like this CSR 305, same deal, probably a 10 weight. But I even run 10 weight in my other bike here, my main bike. I mean, from what it is that it goes, the heavier or the larger the number of the fork oil, the more stiff it's going to be of a ride. You go down lower, then it's going to be a lighter, more springy ride. Which you don't really want springy rides on road bikes, of course. The first step we're going to do with this, we're going to take off the fender. There's 4 bolts on either side, well, two on this side, 2 on the other side. We're going to loosen the directionals, the stems. Over here, we're going to take the brake caliper off. Once we get around to the other part, we will take the axle out, we'll take the wheel off. Obviously have the bike jacked first. Then from the bottom, we're going to come up through here with an Allen key. And we're going to just loosen the bolt. There's multiple ways of doing this. Some people will leave the forks in the tree, jack it up, and they'll just pull this bottom off. Me personally, the preferred way of how I prefer to do it is to take them out of the tree itself, pull them out, and do it the old-fashioned way. So you can drain your oil through that Allen bolt that sits in the top here. We'll show you when we get that apart, but when you have to have a very long Allen key on a socket to fit up into here to do this. Now, when you do it, they're very tight and they bolt into the damper assembly, and if you turn them slowly, they're just going to turn the assembly. So when you go to loosen them, you're going to have to give it a nice quick tight turn to get it to crack. Now once you got these parts off that I just talked about and you got your bike jacked up, obviously you need to have the axle passed through still. You can do it if you have the wheel off, but well, I mean, you have to have the wheel off and the axle off. But keep in mind this is going to turn with it, so that may be kind of a pain. You might have to put it in a vise potentially. I don't know. We'll show you that when we get farther. But after you loosen that, you can drain your oil that way, but I wouldn't pull them out. I prefer to drain the oil out the top. And then you need to loosen your caps before you pull these unloosen the pinch bolts, so you're not turning your assembly. And you don't need to take them off or anything, as you're going to take the forks out, but just, you know, loosen your caps so they're not too tight to get out. Alright, so we're going to do that, and we'll show you the rest of it. We have our new fork seal kit, fork oil, and dust boots. And you need a couple different types of simple tools for doing this. However, your main thing is a very long Allen key to fit up into there. You shouldn't, unless you have a bike that's been sitting for a long time, you shouldn't really need an impact driver to get stuff off with. That's a good way of stripping out stuff. Just general wrenches, adjustable wrenches are helpful. Your screwdrivers for loosening these. Again, shorter Allen key for loosening the pinch bolts. For reassembling, you have to pound the bushings and the seals back in. There's a couple ways of doing it. You can spend a shit ton of money on a seal driver kit. Unless you're running a shop, you're working on multiple bikes like me. Doing this yourself in your garage, then definitely not worth spending the money. So what we can show you is basically just some. This one's really too thick, but we'll get some thinner. Some waste pipe. You can cut this about in half, and then cut it down the middle. And what you do is one piece over the fork, and then a second piece wrapped around it. And you clamp it down with a muffler clamp of the right diameter that would fit around this. And from there, you can take the top and just bang it down into the bottom to set the bushing, and then you do you set one piece down and then bang it down to get the seal in. But I've seen people use the bent punch method. That's kind of I don't know, that's a sketchy way. It's a good way to scuff up your forks and stuff. So anyways, we'll get this stuff off. We'll show you guys how to do this. Alright, so we've taken our fender off. The 4 bolts that set up in here. I took these off with a 10mm wrench. I think this is actually a 9mm head, but I mean, it's different for every bike, but you'll figure it out with the shadow. We took the fender off. This is attached to the where the bolt passes through. We're holding the brake line. We got 2 caliper bolts here and here. This was an 11/16 drive. That fit on alright. However, I think this is actually metric too. Feels like it. You got a little bit of play. So I don't know what size that is in metric. Just make, I mean, most everything on this bike is pretty much metric thread, metric heads. So have your metric sockets out, your metric wrenches. You got 2 washers. And your caliper bolt. It's much harder to do this and hold the camera at the same time. We've already loosened this, of course. Now, make sure to take your caliper bolts and, fuck, where is it? Set it on a piece of paper towel. You want to keep them nice and clean. As with all your parts, just like that. The bolt's lube, so now this is loose. We're gonna get our hands friggin' dirty. So now your caliper is unbolted, and all you gotta do is just give it a little bit of a wiggle back out. And obviously we'll do it at a later date, but you can see these pads are beyond their wear mark, and this caliper needs to be cleaned pretty thoroughly. So you need to find some way to set your caliper up out of the way. I think what I'm going to do is probably zip tie it to the tree, because you don't really want this dangling by the brake line. At the same time, you don't want to set it somewhere where it's going to be too much of a problem, because remember, brake fluid is corrosive. For now, we'll just set it there and zip tie it after. Alright, so we got that. Now we're going to come over and loosen the directionals. And judging on the back, there's a bolt here and a bolt here. Let's figure out what we can fit in there, and what size that is. Very, very small. Here's a 6 or 7 millimeter here. Oops, that's tightening. 6 or 7 millimeter wrench here. Sorry, the camera angle's not real good. Standard wrench, I wouldn't bother, not standard wrench, but metric wrench. I wouldn't bother trying to get a socket up into this. It'd just be a pain in the ass. So just do this on both sides. You don't really need to take it off. Well, I mean, you can if you want, but the only way you're really going to get this out of here is pulling the forks anyways. But we just want to loosen it up so when we slide the forks out that they won't be attached. Alright, so we've loosened the directionals on both sides, taken the fender off, the caliper. Next thing we need to do is loosen the axle. Not take it out. Remember, we got to jack the bike first. So on some bikes, you'll have your axle bolt that passes through. And then on the other end, you will have a nut. On this one, it just tightens into the other fork. So it should just be standard socket. With this one, it sits in the inlet. So you're going to have a very specific sized socket with the diameter to take this one out. And I'll let you know what this is in a minute. Other ones usually sit on the outside. As long as you got regular sockets, metric, and you should be all set. Alright, so this is a 14 millimeter regular socket. Fits in here fine. 14 millimeters, the same size as the drain plug. They're actually nice with this bike. They make a lot of different bolts and parts the same size, so you don't have to mess around all the time. In reference to that also, not all Suzuki Savage bikes are 14 millimeter on the drain plug. Some of them are 17 depending on the year. However, this one is a 14. So we're going to loosen our axle bolt. Alright, sorry guys, I forgot to mention one thing. Before you loosen the axle bolt, there's pinch bolts at the bottom here. Or one pinch bolt at the bottom, only on this side, because it doesn't have a nut on the other side, which is a hex. You can use a standard hex wrench for this. However, I would recommend, if you have the right size, there's the other toolbox, to use an Allen key like this. Alright, the size on this one, not on every bike again, just on this, should be a 6 millimeter Allen key. Oh, every time you go to do something, you never know where the frickin' tool is made. Oh, whatever, we'll just use it. Or not. Or we'll just drop it on the floor. Alright. We're having a great day here. Setting the phone down. so. Just give that a couple taps like these. These are usually pretty tight. Then it'll be nice and loose. That will come out. Then you can take your axle nut out. Can't do that without taking this out first. I mean, I suppose you can, maybe, but you're going to destroy this bolt. You're going to destroy your axle. Alright, that's out. Now you can go 14 millimeter. Nice and easy. This axle will start to turn. Already loose. So we're just going to pull it out a little bit. You can see it's not too far out of the threads. Now we're going to jack the bike. For jacking the bike, if you have a bike jack, that's preferable. If not, you can use bottle jacks and to lift it. Well, not bottle jacks, floor jacks. Bottle jacks are usually too tall. Set it up on stands or whatever. You can use the kickstand actually as leverage to jack the bike up. Just make sure you take a tie down or some rope and tie that off somewhere, preferably where it's Alright, so we've jacked the bike. Now what we can do is see our forks turn freely, our wheel turns freely, so we can take the wheel off. So we're gonna loosen this all the rest of the way. Get the axle out. There's an axle spacer here that will come out. Yeah, I'm sure there's one here too. So we're gonna pull the axle. Right, when you pull your axle, make sure you sit it on something like a paper towel because it's greased in there, greased around the bearings, and you don't want to get dirt and shit in there. Remember which side your spacer is. This side goes to here. That side here goes on the caliper end. Then you can simply roll your wheel right out, like so. And again, be careful not to get too much dirt in the wheel bearings. Whoops, we got some stuff on the caliper. That's right, we'll clean that off. Brake cleaner. So you've got your pinch bolt out, you've got your axle. Now, these now move freely. Now, what we need to loosen is right up in here. There's another Allen head. And you have to go through the bottom, so you're going to need a relatively long one. You're not going to be able to use a regular wrench. You're going to have it like this, but you're going to have this longer to be able to fit up in there. See easily, this does not fit up in there. Most sockets won't fit up in there either. It's kind of a specialty item. Most of the times you'll need to buy a set of them if you don't know what your pinch bolt size is, or what your damper bolt size is. So I'd recommend, if you have a set, great. If not, figure out what with the standard hex wrench fits up in there, what size it is, and then go out and buy a single one if you can. Alright, so now the next step is going to be, before we pull these out of the tree and loosen the pinch bolts, making sure our top caps are a little bit loose and making sure these are loose. So, if some idiot raced them on, you may have to actually loosen these, take your caps off, and move your sit. You don't have to disconnect the wires, but pick the handlebars up and move them back to be able to reach the caps with a socket head or something. I don't know, I guess you might be able to get it in there without doing that. No, you won't, sorry, because it sits underneath. In severe cases, they may be on so tight you may have to take an impact wrench to be able to loosen them. Do not use that to tighten them. They're very, very fine threads, and if you strip those out, your whole fork is fucked. But this one, to the right side, I just popped loose. It was already kind of loose with an adjustable. Get a giant wrench like this. Preferably, if you have the correct sized standard wrench, use that over an adjustable. However, I don't have a standard wrench with me that's metric that's that big. So I'm gonna have to set the phone down for this, but you're gonna have to hold your handlebars when you do this. Should have done this one before I had taken the tire off. I did the other side, but so with this shadow over here, you loosen the bottom bolts and the top one, and then you could just pull. You know, once you got all like I am with there, you could just pull the forks right out. This is different, actually. I haven't done Suzuki's before. The top of the cap is actually wider than the lip of the bottom. And they did this because there's bottom pinch bolts, but there's no pinch bolts at the top. That has pinch bolts at the top and the bottom part of the tree. So that's all set with this. That's what they did to, you know, since they didn't have pinch bolts at the top. These are set in here. And we can just wiggle, wiggle, wiggle the fork out. And when you do this, your directionals are gonna hang down like this. Remember, be careful when you do this because you've got oil in here. And your assembly. We didn't end up loosening the bottom hex bolt because we can just do that in a vise, really. So set them upright somewhere where they're not going to fall over with your old oil, and do that like so. So we've taken the forks out, we've taken the caps off. We did that only because, for the reason of those caps are set into the top of the tree. Other bikes, they have pinch bolts at the top and they will pass through the tree. This one, they will not. We may have to set those back in there to get the damper bolts out at the bottom. I don't know. We'll see. So the first step is to drain your old oil. So take these, find an oil container. You could just take a water bottle container and drain into that. Simple as it is. When you tip your fork upside down to drain the oil, your first piece, I mean, some of these cartridges are all bolted together. On this one, they're free float. You got your top here. That comes out of the top. Below that is this washer. Just be careful because on some of them, they have a washer at the top. Then your spring assembly. Remember which way it comes out. You see it's a little bit thinner here at the top, not at the bottom. This is your top right here on this one at least. Somehow are like that on both ends. Maybe they're interchangeable. This spring is not. Next, what you want to do while you're draining oil is push the fork in and out, working it to get all the oil out of it. When you push it in and out, more oil is going to come out. After you've done that, you need to kind of get all this excess old oil out of here. This oil is pretty black. There's a couple different types of cleaners and oils you can use to wash it out with. I use a little bit of Marvel Mystery Oil. Put it in there, swish it around, and then drain it again to clean it out with. Before we drain the oil, we're going to actually take the dust boot off, which we've did. You just need to pry it out with a screwdriver. Lift up, pull it up. Now we're going to take a look at the fork seal itself. And wow, that's pretty bad. See all that rust in there? This bike had 9,500 miles. It has not been done at all. From what I can see, that would be why they're leaking. So there's a circlip that sits in here. A little spring, I don't know if you can see it, metal clip. That needs to get popped up with a screwdriver. And from there, we'll take this to the vise, take the bolt out of the bottom, and then we can actually separate the halves, which pulls the seal and the bushing out, separates these two halves. So we pulled the circlip out here, just sits up around this deep groove channel, and all you got to do to pull it out is just a little flathead screwdriver, get underneath one of the lips, pull up on both ends, and it pops right up and out. Alright, so we've taken the forks out of the bike. The caps actually did come out of that bike. They're just they're pressed in there because there's a seal at the top. So you can either do this in the bike or out of it. For me, it's easier. You loosen the pinch bolts, you take the forks out, you put them in a vise. Don't be retarded like me. This is going to mar up your forks. Get a towel and put it in between here so you don't scratch your forks. I do this after you drain the oil because then you don't got oil pouring out all over the place. Obviously, you first take in your Allen key, crack the bolt to get a little bit of tension off of it. Now, after you have the oil drain, you've done that. Reinsert the spring and the bushing and everything in there, and then tighten back down your top thread. What this does is it puts spring tension on the bottom and prevents this bolt, socket cap bolt, from turning too much. Because if you don't have that spring in there, as I found out the first time, it's just going to turn. It's just going to spin the assembly in there. You're not going to be actually loosening it. So put the spring in, put the cap back on. Then once it's really loose, you should be able to just take even something like this. And this one for the Savage was actually a, for the size was 5/16. I don't know why it's not metric, don't ask me. Maybe it is and it was just, enough off that it was fine. So now that we've taken our bolt, we've loosened that, we've got the bolt out. You're going to get a little bit of oil that drips out of here even after you finish that. Clean your bolt off, take that off. Now you can go back take the cap back off. Never put your head on top of this or above this. Because you're under fairly decent tension, and if you're not paying attention, you're not holding this tight, shoot one of these caps off into your head. Doesn't feel good. So typically if you're doing this the other way, have a rag on top of this and holding it. I've done this plenty of times now, so pretty familiar. It just pops up just like that. Pull that. Fuck. I think we need more paper towels. It's alright, Nova will clean it up. Anyways, you've gotten that out. Don't forget your washer. Get your spring out. Now, now's when you separate the halves. So now you can see this is fully extended. And the bushing, the two bushings are going to bang on each other. It's going to pull the seal out. In addition, it should pull the rest of it out. Let's get this out of the vise first, actually. This is what lives in the bottom that's turning if you don't have spring pressure on it. Now we can do this. So the best way is to probably take it on the floor, and you're going to pull up like this. like so. Now you've separated your fork halves. Now you have access to your seal and your fork. You want to clean this out thoroughly with some marble oil or something else. Any rust and corrosion out of it. Clean off your forks, wipe them down, clean them up before we start reassembly. Alright, so this is reassembling your forks. I'll show you the different parts of the forks. We have the lower tube here. This is in the bottom here sits a similar to on the axle, a guide that sits in there. What sits in the bottom of that and lives there is this. Bottom end is where the annoying frickin' hex bolt or socket cap head, whatever, sits in there, and this is what is basically putting all of this tension along with the mainspring, of course, and holding whatever end tight you're trying to work on. So that drops down and sits into the recess there. You got your mainspring on this bike towards the top. It's going to be where it looks like that. Shorter spring, longer on the end. Let's see here. Then of course you have your I can't even remember the name of this, but that sits at the very top, and then your cap sits on at the top of this right here. On some bikes, this washer sits in between the cap and this. On this one, the washer sits below that and then in between the spring, because this goes here, like so. That was your bolt. Then you have your actual fork leg. We have bushings here. We have a lower one here that sits in the recess. Then we have the press bushing. Then just this washer here that sits below the fork seal itself. So we're going to put all this back together basically in order, and we'll use a method I'll show you to bang the bushing here and this washer back in, and then the fork seal, and then we can add the fork oil, mix that around, and put the fork back in the bike, the cap back on, reassembly. This is pretty much similar process across most metric bikes. Some will have cartridges basically where all of these parts in the middle, the inside, are all just bolted together. I prefer dealing with stuff like this. It's easy to take apart and clean. It's not, I don't know, you don't have to mess around with it as much. You can choose to take the fork, the whole leg out of the bike, or you, like I've done, or you can leave the top bolted in and take the bottom half out. But the correct way of doing this is to bring the seals and the dust boot and the bushings from the top to the bottom. If you do it from the bottom to the top, I mean, you're getting closer to where they're going to sit, so you don't have to worry about scratches as much. However, you're pushing it in reverse, and for seals that sit like these do, that's probably not a good idea. Regardless, when you bring the seals down, you need to coat the fork leg in a grease. I use white lithium grease. You can use any, if your fork seal kit comes with a special oil, you should use that. That's actually better. And also, we're going to cover the inside of the fork seal with a plastic, kind of like similar to the water bottles, to prevent these minute scratches from cutting into the rubber or the plastic on the fork seal. You don't want to have that travel this whole length of the fork seal, because any scratches or any Any rust marks or rust spots will just lacerate the shit out of that fork seal, and it will leak when you put it back in. So you need to make sure to protect that as you slide it down the fork, and then of course you can release it as you get to the bottom. But we'll put this back together piece by piece, and then add the oil in and replace them. Alright, so you're going to take the lower fork leg, you're going to take the damper rod assembly with the spring. The spring goes on the bottom. That's going to sit into that little recess. Make sure it's centered so when you take this, you can see all the way through, so you know that hole is threaded right there. Then you're going to take your bolt. You'll find it here. There should be a split washer on the end of this that sits up in, and then it's going to bolt into there. Alright, so this is how to reassemble the forks. On a bike like this, you have two sets of pinch bolts, upper and lower, being here and here. So this full fork will actually slide all the way out of the tree, including the top nut. On a bike like this, you can take the fork out and you can take these out, but these have to come up and out. I suppose the fork goes down and out, because these have these little seals and the top rim is wider than the top of the fork. They do that because there's only lower pinch bolts, and that's what holds it in at the top. So during reassembly, first take your caps, set your caps back through, and press them in. Next thing you're going to do, this is after you've already disassembled your fork, you've already taken everything apart, you've already cleaned out the fork with some oil or whatever you use for cleaning. So you're going to take your bottom, look and make sure it's all clean, make sure you get everything out. Always make sure, sometimes they get stuck in the bottom, that you have this copper crush washer on the hex bolt that's going to go in through the bottom. There's different sizes for every bike. This is a Suzuki Savage. This one is an 8mm, I believe. I think on that one, that was maybe like a 6. That one was much tougher to get out with the little bolts. Alright, so what we're first going to do is we're first going to take our rod here. You can see we have the bottom bushing on here. Just clean this off a bit. Got a little bit of dirt sitting. Bottom bushing is still in there. We've taken the other bushing, the top bushing, and the washer off. Obviously the old fork seals and the old dust wipers are out. So in the bottom here sits a channel. What we're going to want to do is you're going to match up with your damper assembly. There's this cap here. This cap is going to sit up in here. Like so. You want to hold that because what's happened is that's going to drop down in, well, this rod here into there. That's where your bolt's going to thread through when this goes back in through here. This is a stopper. So with that, tip this upside down like this. This end's going in. We'll have to set the phone down for a minute. Make sure you have your spring on the bottom, right there. Alright, so that's done. We're holding the bottom in. You can see all the way through here. You might have to hop the spring up and down a little bit to make sure you get a hole all the way through. Sometimes it just gets misaligned. So now from there we are going to set this into the bottom tube and start getting our bolt in. Now when you do this process of moving this in, keep in mind you can't really tip it upside down and you can't really tip it right side up, because if you tip it from this end, then your thing's going to fall out. If you tip it the other way, then your bolt's going to fall out. So you kind of got to hold it like this. Maybe easier to stick on a bench, put in a vise. I'm just doing it on the ground here. Next, you're going to take your bolt and start threading it through. You're not going to be able to really tighten it down without dropping your spring in to put some tension on it. So first, just get the bolt through and thread it a little bit, and then drop your spring down, pushing down the spring a little bit using your Allen wrench. And you can use the 8mm on a socket drive if you have the correct bits, but you do not need to tighten it down much at all. So don't reef on it at all, or you're going to strip that out or never get it back out again. I don't have the torque specifications if you're going to properly do a torque setting with a torque wrench, but you can look that up in your manual, your service manual if you have one, or online. Keep in mind when you add your spring on a particular bike like this, the shorter end of the spring goes at the top, regular long end goes at the bottom. Some bikes are different, so make sure you remember when you take it out how it goes back in. Holding your spring, you can then tighten this down at the end, the bolt. Now your assemblies are not going to come apart. From there you can now set this down. And now what you need to do is get ready to drive your bushing back in and your seal. So we have our bushing here. Also, on top of that goes the washer, and then you have your fork seals. You should be using a correct method for this. Rather than buying a seal driver kit, which are kind of expensive, the best way is to take some waste pipe like this, cut it much shorter than this, of course, probably in half, cut it down the end, and get a muffler clamp. Put this around the end so it would obviously sit down over this, and clamp it, and then you can use that action to just pop it down into its recess. This sits down into the recess. Once that's done, then your washer goes on top of that, and then your fork seal. So we're gonna get the bushing in first. Alright, so sorry I can't show this very well because I'm filming, but we had clamped that, and now you can see the bushing sits down in its channel, and you'll know it won't go any farther. It sits right at the lip level with the rest of it. So from there, and it's also it makes it easier if you lube it a little bit. I use like some white lithium grease or something like that, or if your fork seal kit came with some fork seal grease, then you can use that. Also helps to slide it up and down the fork. So now you have your washer. It's going to sit down in the channel, and now you're ready to put your fork seal on. With your fork seal, you do not want to take it from the top of this and just slide it right down, because any little scuffs, any little lacerations, rust spots are going to lacerate the inside of that fork seal, and when you put it back in, it's going to eventually leak again. So you have to do it all over again, big waste of time. So with that, you need to also grease it with, if you got fork seal grease or a lubricant, preferably, well, not preferably, you need to have something that is not going to eat its seals. Do not use WD-40. Stuff that's not good for rubber or plastic. That's why I use lithium grease or I don't know, something similar to that. You also need to take the fork seal, and I'm going to show you just with the old one, and on the inside of it, surround it with a plastic lining. So you can slide this down the length of the fork, then remove the lining, and then set it into its channel. This is done so that obviously you won't have the problem of lacerating as you move it down the fork. So you can use a piece of plastic water bottle that's thin, something like that. Best thing is like cut up milk container generally. So we've taken a water bottle and we've cut it down. Cut it in a piece like this. So basically, I'm not going to touch it with the old one, but that is going to slide into the center of this so we can slide it down the fork. So take this, grease the outside of this, and then slide your seal over, and then slide it down the fork. Make sure to pull your fork, the upper piece, all the way up and set it down. The pain with this type, where the caps don't come out, well, I mean they come out, but you need to put them back in to get the forks back in, is you have to basically hold the top of the fork up and put your oil in and hold it like that, and then feed it up in with the oil like that, and then twist your cap on. So it's a little bit harder, but it works still. Now basically we've done the same thing with the seal, with the fork seal. So we've slid it down using this, lubed up, make sure it didn't get scuffed on the rest of the forks. Now it sits down in its own recess, and it's kind of hard to see here, but if you see that line, that's where your snap ring is going to go back in before the dust boot. So you've got the snap ring. Make sure you go ahead, give this a good clean before you put it back in, and then you're going to put your dust boot on. With your dust boot, make sure it goes the right way up. You don't need to lubricate it. Well, I mean, you could lubricate it a little bit, but don't have to worry about using the other method because it's just a dust boot. Remember, it's not a seal. So it could just slide over the end like so. So for the Suzuki Savage owners, the amount of oil you're going to put in each fork is going to be 14.9 milliliters. Sorry, no, not milliliters. 14.9 ounces, or 441 milliliters, I believe. So roughly half this bottle, but less. So half of 30 is 15, so 3.8 plus 0.2. So 4 ounces you're going to leave out. The rest is going to go in evenly in each fork. This is a 10 weight fork oil. Suppose you could use 15 if you really wanted to, but 10 weight's perfectly fine for this. 5 weight's too light, 20's too heavy. We're going to go and add the oil and get the forks back in. Alright, now that we've finished that, the spring's already in here, remember. So the only thing we need to put on is the washer that sits in between the spring and in between that rod. And then you can add your fork oil and then pass it back up in through the tree. Obviously, fork oil per fork depends on your bike. The thing you want to do once you get the fork oil in is move this up and down like so. That'll get all the air bubbles out, because remember, it's going to pass in between there and small crevices and all the way up in through here. So make sure you got that all back together. You can pass that up through your tree, tighten your nut, and then get everything back together. Tighten your pinch bolts. Remember to have the right side of the fork. Remember, there's 2 different bottoms. And the other thing is, make sure when you're tightening the cap on a cap that sits in that has to stay up top, do not be twisting the fork to tighten the cap, because you'll scratch the hell out of this fork on the pinch bolts and on the fork tree.